Here we are, another wall. Where else would you be in Melbourne if not near a graffitied wall? This is Melbourne. Forget about Hosier's Lane and paint bombing. This is the place to be. Look, I felt depressed today when I woke up, and I didn't really feel like talking to you today, but I've got a wall. I've got a silver wall behind me. I can be everything and anything. Now you've got all the workers from McDonald's headquarters kind of strewing past. Don't worry about them. I'll be talking about veggie burgers. It's all right. Even McDonald's can be incorporated into the veggie world. So as long as there's a buck, doesn't matter what issue orientated politics you're in, there's a buck involved, they'll be in on it. I've even noticed a vegetarian meat pie at my local service station. Couldn't believe it. So today I want to talk about discuss the cone of silence. Remember that old film, television, I used to love as a little kid? Get Smart. You had 99, you had Get Smart, you had Maxwell Smart, and whenever we wanted to talk to the director of the secret agency that was just combating chaos, he would have the cone of silence come down. And sometimes I feel we live in a society which is much more censorious than the Iron Curtain and the Bamboo Curtain. I know we love to talk about the Chinese censorship and censorship in authoritarian countries, but and I'm not talking about what's happening with the ABC and the federal police investigating the Australian Broadcasting Corporation and the federal government politicising the Australian Federal Police to suit its current political agenda, and the federal government trying to frighten whistleblowers from actually opening their mouths when they see things that are quite extraordinary which the government is trying to hide. Not even talking about that. I'm talking about the general cone of silence that we all face every day of our lives living in a so-called liberal democratic society. When I use the word liberal democratic, I use it facetiously, because obviously we don't live in a liberal democratic society. We live in a society where the parliamentary agenda is decided by a small section of society that owns the means of production, distribution, exchange and communication. Simple. For example, everybody says we now have the net, we now have social media, we are all masters of our own destiny, we decide what the political, social and cultural agenda of the day is. We make those decisions. The legacy media no longer has a hold on us. There is no cone of silence. We can talk about anything we like. I'll give you an example. I've got a Facebook page and a YouTube presentation, as you know. I put up a few pictures of some vegetables I'm growing. Haywire, went viral, couldn't believe it. I do incisive commentary, minimal response. And why is that? Cone of silence. Because people have forgotten to think outside the box. People have forgotten to think that there is more than one way to approach an issue. I'll give you an example. Look at affordable housing, the issue of affordable housing. It's all about privatising the public sector, public housing. It's all about social housing, affordable housing, community housing, giving housing over to privately owned organisations, whether for-profit or not for-profit, to deal with the issues of homelessness and housing affordability. So what have we got in 2020? We've got a situation where society we've gone backwards as far as home ownership is concerned, and we've gone forward as far as homelessness is concerned in terms of the number of people who are in housing stress. You like that word, housing stress? It's not homelessness anymore, it's housing stress, rental stress, mortgage stress. You know, you can't fucking meet the bills at the end of the day. That's what that means, you know. Sorry for the expletive, but there are some things, this kind of silence comes over that you can't believe it. Now, I'll give you an example. I'm familiar with Victoria as I live here. Well, I exist in the Victoria, Queen Victoria's, outpost in the Antipodes, and we've got a homeless problem, and we've got a problems and accommodation problem, and we've got a rental affordability problem, and we have a problem regarding housing ownership, home ownership, and we've got a problem regarding servicing mortgages. When the average mortgage is $500,000, that's $500,000, and the average house price in Victoria is reaching $1 million. and there's no wage growth, and wage theft by major corporations is rampant in this country, and there's no hope of any wage growth because trade unions have been legislated out of existence, so there's no possibility of any effective collective bargaining by working people. And when 1/3 of the population is so marginalised, they rely on social security benefits to survive, housing prices continue to increase, rents continue to increase, mortgage payments continue to increase, the size of a mortgage continues to increase. And there is no debate, no discussion about why. In a capitalist economy, if you don't have a mixed economy, and that's a fancy phrase for saying if you don't have the public sector competing with the private sector, and you give the private sector every opportunity to exploit the situation, they will exploit the situation, whether it's the financial sector, whether it's the housing sector. And in Australia, what we've seen is the destruction of the public housing concept, the destruction of a public housing philosophy. In the past, people on low wages who were working could have got into a public house, a state-owned home, and pay 25% of their income as rent and have housing affordability and allow their children to attend the same sporting facilities, the same schools, and not be faced with the prospect of moving all the time. But today, it's all about privatisation in the private sector. So, in Victoria, which I'm familiar with, the Victorian state government collects $6 billion in sales tax from housing every year. $6 billion. If you are fortunate enough to get a mortgage, not only do you pay the banks, you've got to pay the state government a tax. And does the state government use this tax to build a strong public housing sector? No. It uses that tax into consolidated revenue. And this particular government in opposition is all about removing railway crossings, widening roads, building tunnels. That's all it's about, because people can see what's happening. It's not about improving housing affordability. So how can you improve housing affordability without revolution and chaos? Very simple. No, you don't own a Monaro. My apologies to all those Holden workers who've lost their job. But you improve housing affordability by building up the public housing sector. If you allocate the $6 billion, which is collected by the Victorian State Government as sales tax and collected by state governments around Australia, if you allocate that for public housing, you could solve the problem of homelessness in Victoria in 4 weeks. You could get the 100,000 people on the waiting list off the waiting list within 12 months. You could house 1 million Victorians in public housing within a decade. And you don't need to build huge apartment complexes, which the private sector uses to fatten themselves up. What you do is you spot purchase properties around the state. Regional areas, regional cities, rural areas, major cities, CBD, outer suburbs. $6 billion buys you a lot of bloody properties, I can assure you of that. A lot of properties. And you could house 25,000 people in public housing every year. Bang. More. You could actually house 100,000 every year. 25,000 in 3 months. And you don't need a huge building program. So, where's the debate? Where's the debate? For example, if you've got a strong public housing sector and people live in public housing, rents decrease. Why do they decrease? Because people are paying rent to the state. The state uses that money to expand the public housing sector and maintain the public housing sector. Fewer people would need to live in private accommodation, therefore rents decrease. What happens when rents decrease? All those investors, that 8% of Australians who take advantage of this country's taxation-friendly laws with negative gearing and franking credits, will run away from the housing market at the lower end. Prices drop, rents drop, prices drop. More people can rent at affordable prices. And when prices drop, it means that young people can actually enter the housing market and raise the deposit for a home. And the economy, everybody, small business, even corporations benefit, because there'll be more disposable income that actually goes into consumption, which basically means buying shit you don't need every day. Alright? You can consume more because you've got more disposable income. Because if you're in public housing, only 25% of your income goes to rent to the state government. Not 40%, not 50%, not 60%. So everybody's happier. But if you try to get this debate up in the community and use the legacy media, newspapers, radio, television, or even use social media, no interest. It's never debated. It's never raised as a serious issue. And we can look at all other facets of life in Australia and we get the same thing. For example, I'll give you another example of how the trivial and the spectacle is everything in 21st century society, especially Australian society. Look at television, look at the media, look at Twitter, look at the crap that actually grabs people's imagination. And why does it grab people's imagination? Because that is all they are exposed to. Because there is no serious debate, because of this cone of silence in our community, where we accept as gospel truth. It is written in the most important religious text of the time. Not the Quran, not the Bible, not the Torah, not Buddhist script, not Hindu script, but it is written in the most important script in 21st century society, the corporate manual. Maximise profits irrespective of the human, social, environmental and national costs. I'll give you an example. Federal Royal Commission into Institutional Child Abuse. There are 7,000 people who are making claims on various institutions. It would cost about $70 million, maybe $80 million to pay out these 7,000 people. So what does the federal government do? Now these people have had to deal with major psychological issues for decades. These people and their families, their children, their partners, have been through hell for decades. Alcoholism, drug addiction, psychiatric issues. They've been through hell. And what happens? The federal government has a compensation scheme which is dependent on the very institutions which were responsible for the abuse paying up. 10% of these 7,000 will not get compensation because there is no particular institution which is there to pay up. It's just extraordinary. So why didn't, at the end of the Royal Commission, when the Royal Commission said compensation was needed and the government accepted that finding of the Royal Commission, why didn't the federal government just pay out the money when you think they spent $100 million on bodgy sporting complexes before the last federal election in order to buy the last federal election? Why couldn't they spend the $70-80 million, give these people compensation? Many of them are dying, many of them are elderly, give them their compensation and then put the screws on the institutions which abuse them to cough up. You don't pay your taxes, they'll put the screws on you to cough up. But as far as these institutions are concerned, they continue to get billions of dollars of government funding to continue programs which, the government should be providing. It's just an extraordinary situation. So it's a mentality. Where was the debate? Where was the cone of silence? People went, tut, 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 tut. Isn't this terrible? But the issue is basically a federal issue. We should have the heart and the soul to compensate people who everybody knew during that period in the 50s and 60s and 70s and 80s who had been abused. Every school kid knew. We all had little jokes about not being found alone with the priest and not becoming an altar boy. We all knew in our hearts of hearts. Nobody raised it. It's just an extraordinary situation. So there is a cone of silence. There are things we can talk about and things we can't talk about. We can talk about homophobia, we can talk about racism, we can talk about corruption sometimes, not every time. I've got a friend who's going to court in a few weeks because he was ripped off by the banks. Millions of dollars in the 80s. And he's been conducting a one-person campaign since then. And he's got to go to court because they claim that he broke an intervention order in 2016 and now they want to introduce an intervention order to 2040 and the bloke's almost 80. Could you imagine that? Extraordinary. But this is the situation we find ourselves in, where the victims continue to pay the price for other people's excesses and governments' inability to deal with these excesses. So I am appealing to you, forget about the trivia, forget about the spectacle, think about these issues, put up real solutions, irrespective of what people think. They may think you're a little bit far-fetched, but these are real solutions to solve real problems. It's not about making a media statement or clicking and being a clicked activist. You see my little click finger? I never bloody use it. You know, agree, like, so what? So bloody what if I like it? They know that clicked activism is a waste of time. If it's directed against an individual, great success, as we saw with the principle of St Kevin's in Melbourne. But if it's directed against the system, directed against the corporate sector, you never hear about it. You never see it, because we live in a society where the agenda every single day is set by the legacy media. Now you think I'm kidding. Why do you think Mr Murdoch and his family continue to bankroll the Australian, the most conservative, ugly fiction that you can see in this country every day? They've never made a penny out of the Australian in the 51 years it's been in existence, because newspapers, the legacy media, continues to set the agenda every day. What you see on social media is determined by what appears in the newspapers in the majority of cases. What you see on television, what you see on radio, what you see on YouTube on a daily basis during the 24-hour news cycle is determined by what appears in the legacy media that morning. So if you think we're living in a brave new world where citizen journalism triumphs over corruption, triumphs over inequality, triumphs over unfairness, where it delivers justice, think again. We are living in a society which is no different to 19th century society. Power still lies in the hands of that small section of society that owns the means of production, distribution, exchange and communication. Especially in a country where, like Australia, where the national broadcaster, the Australian Broadcasting Corporation, has been gelded repeatedly through lack of funding and through editorial guidelines which ensure that idiots, climate change flat earthers, continue to dominate the debate in this country about an issue which was settled scientifically years ago. Next week, who knows what will get my gander. But remember, it doesn't matter what I say, it doesn't matter how annoyed I am, it doesn't matter how depressed I am, it doesn't matter how wonderful the graffiti is behind me. Ultimately, change comes when you make the decision to get involved in that struggle to bring about change, whether it's reform, whether it's radical change. And I implore you, not beg, I don't beg and beseech, I implore you to join public interest before corporate interests today. Download the application form, pipsy.net. Not computer literate, while you're watching the YouTube presentation, you can always write to me at Post Office Box 20, Parkville 30524 for an application form. Hopefully, by the end of the year, we will be registered as a federal political party and we can start kicking butts. Because if there's one thing they're worried about, it's about people entering their ring and knocking them out with ideas which are practical and which provide certainty to Australians.